It's December 15th, 2011, and we're here at Specialty Health. Today is a very special day because we have two incredible speakers for our conference tonight. We have a return speaker, that's Mr. Gary Taubes. Gary was a speaker, oh gosh, was it about a year ago? He was a speaker about a year ago, and Gary came and in about a 3-hour period of time just got rolling and presented to our audience of maybe 80 people or so. He presented his book, Why We Get Fat. And that was a wonderful conference. Since then, we've gotten to know Gary. We've kept in contact with Gary. Gary's been very helpful with our programs. And the other speaker we've got here today is Dr. Tom Dayspring. Dr. Dayspring is from New Jersey. He's a highly sought-after lipid educator. He's the recent recipient of the President's Award for Teaching Excellence from the National Lipid Association. Tom has done more to change how physicians think about lipids than anybody I know, and we're tremendously thrilled to have Tom here today. Tom writes the most popular lipid newsletter in the world. I don't think there's any question about that. It goes out to approximately 10,000 people all over the world.
By the time it gets repeated and resent to everybody, that's probably the number.
Yeah. And what brought us together with you two, was something you said in the September 2011 newsletter. That was newsletter number 280. 280. Lipidaholics Anonymous. Here's what you said. I cannot recommend more highly that you pick up Gary Taubes' new book, Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It. This book refutes virtually everything we've been taught about calories and weight gain, and makes the case that at least insulin-resistant humans better start eating a lot more fat while avoiding the carbs. It's time to turn the food pyramid upside down. This is a book you will not be able to put down, and you will shake your head at how duped we have been. It is a simpler situation to how much effort has been wasted chasing cholesterol values and ignoring what really matters, the particles carrying the cholesterol. The National Lipid Association definitely needs to invite Mr. Taubes as a featured speaker at the next annual meeting. That got our attention. We've been Gary Taubes fans, and we've been fans of yours, but didn't know you quite that well. And so, with the help of a physician in Chicago, Dr. Finley Brown, who was a speaker here 2 years ago, you and I got in touch, and we had a conference call with you and Gary, and Grant was there, other people were there, and we walked out of that conference call, and I know Gary felt the same way. We were so sorry we didn't record it. And so now we get a chance to do the same thing with both of you live. So we welcome you to Reno.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction.
Thank you, Rainey.
So our goal here is to get the appropriate, one of our goals is to get the appropriate nutritional message out to our police officers and firefighters. As you both know, that's our target audience. Tom, your father was a firefighter for 39 years.
He was.
Yeah, so we, you and I have talked about that. We share a common interest there. This is a 8-ounce Coke that's, the date on this is 1984, Gary.
Probably flat.
It's probably flat. So that was the serving size for a Coke in 1984. And this is the current serving size for a Coke today. This is a 20-ounce Coke. But as you see, the Coke is gone, and in the bottom of it, there's a white substance. That's the sugar that's in a Coke this size. A Coke this size has 65 grams of sugar, and in addition to that, the label says it has high fructose corn syrup. And so, what are your thoughts when you see these two items? Are these the types of items that you consume regularly, or do you think our firefighters and police officers should be consuming this?
Well, this is one of the interesting thing about 1984 is that's the date, that's the year that the National Institutes of Health held a consensus conference and decided that every American over the age of 2 should get on a low-fat diet. It's also the year that high fructose corn syrup replaced sugar in Coca-Colas and Pepsis and started to take over the caloric sweetener market. And what happened is, as we decided from the mid-1970s to the mid-1980s that the problem with modern diets is the fat content of the diet. And so we should all eat low-fat diets, and sugar's got a free pass in all of this because something like Coca-Cola is a low-fat, it's got no fat in it. And there was actually a theory going around at the time that some people still believe that if a food didn't have fat in it, it couldn't make you fat. So we started decreasing the amount of fat we consumed, increasing the amount of carbohydrates because there's a trade-off there, and sugar consumption increases. And what happened with this, there's a lot of data today, there's always been a lot of data since the 1960s onward, that sugar, which includes both sucrose, which is the white stuff in here, and high fructose corn syrup, they're both different forms of sugar, it's probably the fundamental cause of this condition called insulin resistance. This would be a controversial position, but there's significant evidence out there. Whenever studies are done, there was recently some studies done by Peter Havel's group at UC Davis and the Sacramento area showing that you could basically cause the symptoms of insulin resistance in 2 weeks just by feeding someone the equivalent of about 3 12-ounce cans of Coca-Cola or 3 12-ounce cans of a sugared sweetened beverage a day. And one of the things we'll discuss as we move on is what happens once a human being becomes insulin resistant, what that does to it's called their lipid profile, and in turn their arteries and virtually everything else in their body. So, you could make the argument, and it's pretty compelling, that the fundamental cause of this condition called insulin resistance, in fact, and what starts us on this path to getting fat to begin with is the sugars in our diet. The fact that we love them is almost irrelevant. The question is, are they the items that first cause us to start gaining weight, that cause our lipids, our cholesterol, triglycerides, HDL, again, Dr. Dayspring will talk about this, to go haywire, and then once they start going haywire, you end up with heart disease and maybe even cancer, maybe even Alzheimer's, diabetes as well. If I were going to prescribe a healthy diet, the first thing I would remove are the sugars. And even the ones that come in relatively healthy seeming forms, like for instance the Gatorade that you've got sitting next to you but haven't showed us yet.
That was great. So, Tom?
It's funny, when I'm looking at these food substances on your desk as a clinical lipidologist, lipidology, the study of lipids, but the only reason we study lipids is because we're on the mission to take out the #1 disease that's killing most Americans, and that is atherosclerosis. And atherosclerosis is simply a buildup of cholesterol in your artery wall. It's not a buildup of sugar in your artery wall. So as a lipidologist who wants to take out this disease that is on line 1 of every other death certificate, I look at food substances and I say, is there a relationship to atherosclerosis? And if there is, maybe I better understand that relationship. And it's funny, although it is cholesterol that destroys your artery and causes plaque, the million-dollar question is, how did that cholesterol get in the artery wall? Our arteries do not oversynthesize cholesterol for 30 years and then fill up with plaque. Being a New Jersey boy, I sort of explain this by calling it an illegal dump job of cholesterol in your artery walls. And you therefore have to understand how cholesterol, a lipid, which means it's not soluble in water, traffics in your plasma, which is an aqueous or water solution. And it comes down to the only way any lipid, fatty acids, cholesterol, triglycerides, something you're going to hear more and more of, circulate in your blood is as passengers in a protein-wrapped vehicle called the lipoprotein. You see, proteins solubilize anything in the blood. And if you have the wrong type of lipoproteins, and they cannot be cleared by your liver, because that's what the liver is supposed to do, they're going to wind up in your artery wall. But what's on the inside of a lipoprotein? Some degree of cholesterol. So lipoproteins are the illegal dumpers. So I look at sugar, sucrose, which is fructose and glucose, maltose in beer, which is 2 molecules of glucose together, and say, what could possibly that have to do with cholesterol getting in your artery wall? And to make a long story short, when you do have this insulin resistance Gary spoke of, and there's a bunch of hormonal and metabolic abnormalities going on, you're going to have way too many of the wrong type of lipoproteins. And it doesn't matter even if they're carrying a little bit of cholesterol. So your cholesterol level in the blood might look good. If that dump truck carrying cholesterol is going in your artery wall, I'm going to be signing your death certificate if I don't abort that process or so.
Can I interrupt for one
Yes,
second? Because
please.
what's interesting here is the history. You know, we were obsessed with cholesterol because it's cholesterol in the artery wall. That's been known for 100 years. So the medical community starts off by saying, well, it must be cholesterol that causes heart disease. So you shouldn't eat cholesterol in your diet. And the thought is the cholesterol in your diet becomes too much cholesterol in your blood and it gets trapped in your arteries. And that turns out to be oversimplified, because it turns out the cholesterol in your blood is regulated to some extent by the types of fats you're eating. So by the 1950s, 1960s, we start thinking, well, it's the fat in the diet that raises the cholesterol in the blood, that causes the cholesterol to be collected in the arteries. And this idea gains steam, and the American Heart Association gets behind it. And all they're looking at is, so now it's saturated fats and monounsaturated fats and cholesterol. And it's still a pretty simplistic idea that the fats determine the cholesterol level, and the cholesterol determines atherosclerosis. But then as we get into the 1970s, we start learning about HDL cholesterol and LDL cholesterol and triglycerides. And by 1980 or so, people start looking at the particles, the illegal dumpers, as Dr. Dayspring puts it, as the carriers of the cholesterol, would bring it to the artery wall. And now you start having a different paradigm that starts to take over, which is that what's determining the number and the type of particles that are doing the dumping. And now it's not about the fat in the diet anymore. Now we start looking at this condition called insulin resistance. But meanwhile, we've started giving advice about the importance of eating low-fat diets, the importance of not eating cholesterol in the diet, the importance of keeping your cholesterol low. Doctors are they're testing for cholesterol, they're looking at LDL cholesterol. Everything becomes cholesterol-centered. But as the science progresses through the 1980s, we realize that the problem is this insulin resistance, these metabolic disorders that goes with it, and the kind of particles. So public health advice and the advice we're giving physicians and the advice physicians giving their patients is based on this sort of 30 to 50-year-old history is going one way, and the science is going the other way. And what we're going to learn about is the direction the science went, because that public health advice and the advice of the physicians is still the same.
It's funny how science works. They stumble into things for the most part. And a long time ago, they found cholesterol in the artery walls of people. Some Russian fed rabbits cholesterol and fat that raised cholesterol. And boy, those rabbits got atherosclerosis. So it had to be the cholesterol. Cholesterol has been very easily measured in the blood for God knows how long. None of these other markers Gary is talking about have only recently been able to be measured widespread by clinicians. So cholesterol is what they saw. Cholesterol is what they chase. They believed it, and they tried to do studies that would confirm their hypothesis. And if you read Gary's books, it's kind of amazing that they just kept doing study after study, and they thought And the studies were not supporting their hypothesis that cholesterol in the blood has anything to do with this, but somehow their conclusions still stayed in there. So
We must have done the studies wrong because we know we're right.
a very interesting thing, and it's not that, hey, we smart guys discovered lipoproteins 10 years ago. You quote in your books the godfather of lipoproteinology, John Goffman, in the 1950s had this all worked out and planned, and the man was ignored. And then,
Well, and in the 1950s, there were literally 4 apparatus in the country, 4 or 5 in the country, and they were these huge. They were attached to, particle physics laboratories that could measure the lipoproteins in the blood as opposed to the cholesterol. The cholesterol measurements, as Dr. Datesman said, could be measured since the 1920s. So, if you had one of these devices, you could measure the lipoproteins, and you could start to get the true story, which John Goffman did. But the medical community, again, they can't send everybody to 4 laboratories. They need a simple test. So what was easy and what we could measure became what we believed, as opposed to letting the science drive it.
it is funny, in the classic New England Journal article in 1967 by some other godfathers of lipidology, Fredrickson, Levy, and Lees, in a 5-part series in the New England Journal, and I'm not sure New England Journal has ever devoted a 5-part series to anything since, they actually said in there that we should abandon the terms hyperlipidemia and dyslipidemia and start using hyperlipoproteinemia and dyslipoproteinemia, that this wasn't a lipid disorder, it was a lipoprotein disorder. But again, they had access to an ultracentrifuge, which nobody else in America did. And only into the 1990s did finally real-world docs who were on the cutting edge of knowledge were able to measure lipoproteins, and it became obvious. And then,
by the way, Fredrickson was the head of NHLB, the head of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute at the time, if I remember correctly. Yes. And Levy became the head of the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, while Fredrickson became the head of NIH. These weren't fly-by-night researchers.
No.
But everything's determined by what the doctor in the clinic can do, so the equipment's got to be as simple as possible. The tests have to be as simple as possible. And as a result, what we came to believe turned out to be far too simplistic and wrong.
And there's no doubt there were, as this hypothesis with fat and cholesterol, industry got involved, agriculture, so there are big money involved with promulgating these various type of lifestyles and diets. And once that and the lobbyists get involved with the government that's writing these recommendations, sometimes wacky stuff comes out, or not totally the best type of scientific evidence winds up in these guidelines.
We'll get back to sugar for a second.
Well, so sugar. This is driving an excess number of these lipoprotein particles. That's our message to our police officers.
Well, not only that, one of the messages we've had since the Second World War is that it's all about calories. And I bring this up because industry loves this idea. Okay, the food industry loves the idea that it's all about calories, because then there's no such thing as a particularly fattening food or a toxic food. It's just, hey, Coca-Cola is fine, just drink it in moderation. And if you start getting heavy, exercise more, and that way you increase your expenditure to balance out the increase in calories that you're consuming. The point is, it's not about calories. It's about literally what these hormones do to the liver, to your fat tissue. So this hormone insulin we've been talking about, when we talk about insulin resistance, insulin is secreted by the pancreas in response to the carbs in your diet. And one of the things it does is tells your fat tissue to hold on to fat and to store it. So it puts you into a kind of mode where your fat tissue is accumulating fat. And sugar in particular sugar is half this molecule called fructose, which is what makes it sweet, and the fructose is metabolized in your liver, not in the rest of your body. It doesn't actually stimulate this insulin secretion, but it seems to cause this problem called insulin resistance, where your cells now become resistant to insulin, and as a result, you have to secrete more of it, so that insulin levels in your blood get elevated, minute to minute, day by day, and more of the day than before you're now storing fat and less of it you're burning. So you go into this realm just from the sugar, which seems harmless, even if you don't have that much of it. You're doing it in moderation. I'm only having one soda a day or one dessert or one bottle of orange juice. But that sugar is what seems to be making you insulin resistant. And again, once you become insulin resistant, you start storing calories as fat, and all these other metabolic disorders, again, that we're going to talk about shortly, kick in. So the message is, yeah, if you're going to get rid of anything, that's the first thing. And it goes with the donuts. You don't have a donut. But nobody makes a donut that doesn't have a lot of sugar in it.
You know, an interesting point while you're on calories. Calories are a measure of energy. And every first-year medical student knows fat has 9 calories per gram, whereas carbohydrates only have 4 calories per gram. So it's obvious the way to stop eating calories and get skinny is to stop eating fat. They're so calorie dense. But Gary points out, and I'm not sure even the highest people understand this, different molecules with their calories are handled incredibly different by the human physiology. And there are hormones and a lot of substances in the body, enzymes that are involved with extracting energy from a given molecule or so. So even though fat may have 9 calories per gram, carbs 4, they are metabolized and handled very differently, very different rates in the body. So it's really how the calories are released, not per se the total calories. I mean, you can't eat 10,000 calories and be skinny, but bodies handle calories from molecules very, very differently, and hormones are involved. And insulin is a major league hormone involved with energy metabolism in the body.
Okay, so I can deal with those calories. We can give you a Diet Coke. This has no calories and no sugar. Is this something that we should recommend to our firefighters, Tom?
Well, there's no calories in it. It must be good. But there is a sweetener in it, and your brain is involved with this process. And you're sort of, you know, we have developed this evolutionary craving for sugar because it is instant energy in a crisis or so. And maybe you could be fooling your brain into, yeah, you've satisfied my sweet hunger for the next half hour, but when it's gone, you're craving it more again. So there have been a lot of studies showing people who drink diet sodas get very obese. And I think they have this sweet craving, and they're sneaking in things that aren't totally sugar-free in between. So it's a very
There's a lot of, I mean, it's probably better than the real thing, with the sugar, with the calories. But yeah, it's quite possible that what this is doing is also, as the brain gets involved, you have these kind of Pavlovian responses. You can demonstrate this in animals. It hasn't been done in humans, or I haven't seen it, but it's quite likely that you have a kind of Pavlovian response that includes, again, secretion of insulin or a change in the sensitivity of various organs to the insulin, and that can determine still how you're holding on to fat and whether you're burning it, how you're metabolizing it, and this continued craving for sweets that never goes away.
But I would agree with Gary. In a patient, I would much rather he switches his real Coke to the Diet Coke, no matter what I said.
But the bottom line, I think, is the beverage industry has taken a little bit of a beating here. And so we appreciate your candor. This is a bottle of pure orange juice, no pulp. The orange juice came from our country and from Brazil. Is this a good thing for our firefighters and police officers to consume?
This is one of the, this is where it gets tricky. You know, we grew up with this idea that good health is about getting the right vitamins and nutrients from your diet. Fruits, vegetables, even, you know, people like to push potatoes and French fries because they're the leading source of vitamin C in the American diet. So how can orange juice be bad for you? It's got a lot of vitamin C in it. But again, basically what it is sugar water in a different form. Doesn't matter if it's pure 100% Florida oranges or if it's from concentrate or if it's, you know, mostly artificial. It's mostly sugar water. And our bodies didn't evolve to consume sweets, basically have this, like I said, this fructose dumped on our liver in the course of however quickly you could drink that. You know, if you think about, even if we just ate the oranges and maybe 4 or 5 oranges to get the equivalent of one 12-ounce bottle of orange juice, but you might eat those oranges over the course of an hour, and then your body still takes time, your gut has to digest them. It's going to be a very slow process. You drink orange juice, the fructose gets dumped on your liver responds by trying to turn it into fat. And in the process of doing that, it starts to become resistant to insulin, and that seems to cause a systemic insulin resistance. So in that sense, orange juice is no worse than Coca-Cola, but it's no better than Coca-Cola.
We had a huge fire event here recently, and our firefighters performed brilliantly. They were out there fighting near Connor Buckley's house, a wall of flame. And I noticed that some of them were hydrating with Gatorade. Gatorade's very popular with our football team. We use Gatorade to hydrate football players when they're particularly on game days when it's hot. But Gatorade has a bunch of sugar in it too. Same story?
Well, it's interesting now. It's going to get complicated because if you're doing it in the midst of very heavy exercise or work, fighting a fire, a lot of that sugar and that fructose is going to go to restocking glycogen, which is a storage form of carbohydrate in your muscle. While you're doing this, you're going to be insulin sensitive. It's conceivably relatively harmless while you're doing it, and then the benefits of restocking glycogen and the electrolytes in it could be beneficial. I can't speak to that. The problem is now when you move to doing it, well, first of all, if you're not exercising 8 hours a day or 6 hours a day or sweating, fighting a fire in 90-degree heat, and now you're just sitting in your police truck, in your police car, you're sitting in your firehouse drinking Gatorade because you've come to think it's a healthy thing, or even post-workout, while it will restock your glycogen stores, the question is, what would it do? Are you going to lose weight if you go to the gym, work out for an hour, and then if you're overweight, you're obese, you go to the gym, you work out for an hour, and then you immediately follow the workout with a Gatorade? You're basically undoing everything you've done. Not even from the calories, but specifically from and this alone is probably enough. Exercise will make you sensitive to insulin until you have a large carbohydrate meal. It's about 36 hours. And this alone is probably enough to undo all the benefits of exercise, at least in terms of the metabolic state of your body. So
No, I agree totally with that. If you're a football player, a lumberjack, a fireman fighting a forest fire, you're going to need a lot of energy to do that. And your body will use that energy very rapidly, very quickly. That's not going to be converted into a triglyceride, which will lead to other metabolic abnormalities. But I agree, once they're back in the firehouse or the football game is over, the lumberjack goes home to sleep at night, you don't need to be drinking the second and third bottle of this back in the sedentary.
The interesting thing about Gatorade, by the way, is it was invented at the University of Florida, hence the term Gatorade for the University of Florida Gator. Back in the 1960s, it was originally a glucose-sweetened beverage. And glucose is not very sweet. And if you can remember the original Gatorade, which I can, it tasted like swamp water. It was a little bit sweet. Now it's glucose and fructose. It's the high fructose corn syrup or sugar. It's very sweet. And in the process, again, in the midst of heavy exercise, that fructose may be beneficial to helping you exercise better, but in the long term, it's deleterious to your health.
This is a bottle of water. Is that good for them?
Yeah, I'm all for water.
Well, that is the majority of your body, water, so you do need that.
One of my colleagues in the medical colleagues who's has been studying low carbohydrates for 10 years, his line is, it's not you are what you eat, it's eat what you are. And so what you are is water, fat, and protein. And
most of your plasma is water. Where would the lipoprotein circulate without water?
So.